Welcome, everybody. My name is Saurabh Mohanty. I'm a partner with PwC's Data and AI practice, and I spend most of my time working with organizations, helping them unlock the power of data and AI to transform their businesses. We're going to talk to you a little bit here about some of the things that we're observing in the industries that we deal with. Over to you, Brad.
Thanks, Saurabh. Yeah, and thanks everybody for spending a few minutes today in your busy schedules, hanging out with us and listening to this presentation. I'm Brad Foster. I'm a partner at PwC. Focus a lot on the generative AI stuff that we're doing with Google. I've been involved with Google since really they started. They had 3 beta products years ago: App Engine and Cloud Storage and BigQuery, and so been a part of the AI journey for quite some time. And it's fun to see the next evolution with generative AI and what we're able to do with Google customers and solutions out there. So we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about some things we've learned, I think, over the past year that we think are maybe useful for you guys to hear about. We want to spend some time at the end as well for Q&A, so we'll try to leave some time for that and pass some microphones around. So the topic of this is really kind of 3 secret ingredients, and of course there's more that goes into this, but just to talk about 3 important things around these generative AI solutions is patterns, personas, and controls. And the quick summary is patterns are really those things that are the common components that drive reuse, scale, can drive your costs down, reusability in the organization, prevent people from doing things 5 different times. Personas is really the focus on the business outcome. So the individuals who are using these things in the organizations, and what are they getting out of it? How do you stitch it all together for ultimate value? And what are the nuances of how you build these things to do that? And finally, controls, right? None of this is going into production or going to be used unless everybody feels safe and secure about it. And so not just about the philosophy of those controls, but how do you start to take those controls into systematic implementation? So as you're using it, you can audit it, you have assurances, and it's not just humans trying to follow a paper process, but these applications have this infused, these controls infused. So for example, design patterns, those are things like which models are you using for which solutions, the model tuning and chunking, how do you do that differently, and how do you save best practices, data types and ingestions for your RAG processes, et cetera. Personas, what do you do to get that right? Right? I think everything starts with the user experience. So, we like to talk about LLM and models, but what's the user experience at the end of the day? How do you give that person context? What's the agent's job? How are they trying to perform? How do you get the prompt engineering and the RAG processes correct for that persona? And then controls, obviously things like security, compliance, there's managing capacity, FinOps aspects of this, as well as the accuracy and the quality of the output. So these are the things we're going to talk about a bit today. So jumping into the patterns area, a lot of you are probably familiar with this type of designation of patterns. So this isn't an end-all be-all, but just 6 ways we look at patterns. Being it summarization, so I have information, I want a quick summary of that. Could be structured data, tell me this year's sales. Could be unstructured data, tell me the point of this policy. Could be deep retrieval. Deep retrieval and Q&A are similar, right? Deep retrieval, how are you getting deeper into that semantic nature of data and what it means and surfacing that. Q&A, think of all of the evolution of bots, the chat bots, customer service bots. How are you quickly surfacing those questions? You have transformation types of things. A simple one is obviously language, which now programming, you hear a lot about the developer productivity and what we're able to do with translating, whether it's code or whether it's actual spoken language. We have augmentation for things like autocomplete or test data generation could be another great example of that. And finally, net new creation. So you hear things like marketing, content creation, and Imagen and all of the images and ways it can be used for those types of use cases. But when you look at that at a high level, it's really too high level. When you get into the details of these implementations, these patterns start to come into kind of level 2 and level 3 types of patterns. And I'm not going to drain this eye chart, but I'll give you a couple of examples. And one simple one to start with is the difference between unstructured and structured data. So when you're interacting with structured data, converting that English-based prompt into a SQL command that has to interact with a structured database is a different process than asking that same prompt to an unstructured data set. And behind the scenes, what you have to do to make that work effectively is different. So those are two different patterns. The Q&A seems the same up front, but the back end and how you do that is different. Another is in like net new creation, what you're trying to create. Are you trying to create documents, code, images? So those, again, it's not all created the same. What you're trying to do, I'm doing images, so Imagen is what I might go with, versus I'm just trying to create a new document or an email to send to somebody. It's different how it works in the back end. And another thing that we didn't put on this slide that I think is important is also the types and sizes of, really the sizes of models. I think the price performance game is important as well. So you'll learn for these types of questions and use cases, everything isn't going to be solved by just one huge model doing it all. You're going to find that everything has a price, and so that whether it's slower or whether the answers are too vague because it wasn't as specific of a model, or you're trying to do it on a mobile device, so it needs to be condensed. That's another thing that comes into play as we're all implementing these things. So I'll turn it over to Saurabh now to talk about, as we see these patterns emerge and actually the implementations of these things, how that starts to scale.
Yeah, so one of the challenges that we are observing that most of our clients are facing right now is not at the use case level. I think there's a lot of use cases that are very successfully getting implemented across enterprise functions with the organizations that we work with or we consult with or even talk to on a regular basis. Where they have a challenge is to scale those use cases, productionize them, deploy them across multiple functions to harness the value, and then measure that ROI. That's where most of these patterns come into the picture, because these patterns help you understand reusability of components like vector databases, connectors, plugins that you may have built, any other data sets that you may have modernized, both structured or unstructured, the embeddings. And so as an organization, we often tell our clients to understand those patterns across the enterprise and then figure out how you can look at reusability all the way up to getting the CI/CDs done, the deployments, and then even productionize it at scale. I think that's been the biggest challenge that most companies face around scaling, and then patterns actually help you overcome some of those challenges.
Cool. So that's a quick summary of some patterns. We're going to move into the personas a bit now and talk about how to view that and the importance of this Gen AI journey. So,
the other thing that we've noticed is to ensure that generative AI is actually being deployed at scale and people are harnessing the value, you require a multiple of personas to be able to use this in a seamless way, but also contribute to the build and the deployment of these solutions at scale. So what you'll notice here is the roles of several different individuals within the businesses that need to come together to deploy it. And what we've observed is there are organizations that are being very successful by creating COEs or factory models or deployment teams that are centralized and are doing it in a centralized way across multiple different parts of the business, because then they can detect the patterns, their personas are working together, and then that also helps with the change management, because the usage and the user stories for each of these personas may be slightly different. So when you're building this at scale, when you're centralizing it at scale, you are actually ensuring that your user experiences are getting completely tied into those personas, enabling the users to adopt it much faster across multiple aspects of an organization.
Cool. So this next slide talks a little bit about some specifics when you're going to do an implementation. It all seems easy, right? I just want to upload one document and ask that one question, that seems to work every time, right? Because you took a simple scenario that's not scaled, that doesn't have an enterprise process that's been run for decades wrapped around it. So the first is LLM model selection. So what is the use case? What are they trying to achieve? And then how do you choose the right model for the job? And that, obviously the model garden and Google's own models, like there's just going to be a continued evolution of that we all want to keep an eye on and take advantage of. The next is the context. So how do you ground that persona in what their job is and make it specific so that it's not trying to do everything within those functions. Within a CFO function, there's many different parts of a CFO's organization, all that play different roles. Those need to be embedded into the context of that agent, so to speak. The grounding and RAG processes, again, very important. I think this is a hot, probably one of the hottest topics happening right now is how do you ground these models in your organization's data so that those results are coming back accurate and consistent. And there's a process around getting that right. It can be things as, well, if you have two versions of the policy, which one's correct? If you upload both on accident, your people could get confusing answers, and it's a data input problem. And so getting that right, making sure you're working with those personas to do that is key. And there's things like chunk sizing and overlaps. So that plays a role in the quality of the output that you're getting for some of these models. And again, back to the patterns, they're going to start to emerge best practices for these use cases. Prompt engineering, we're all used to prompting by now, hopefully to some extent. And the way you ask questions is key to this. And do you want to control those prompts? We've seen some clients who are saying, some of this I want the drop-down menu. Like, here's what I've learned are the best ways to prompt this specific business process, and I don't let people get too creative with that because I've learned what generates the best result. Response confidence, another one. Do you want to let it be creative? And if it's not quite sure, it's a marketing campaign, let it be creative versus, hey, I want this to come back. This is a legal situation or a compliance situation. Every time it should come back with the same exact answer based on this input of data that I've provided it. Session history and prompt context. For those of you who use this a bit, I don't know if you've experienced the situation where you're asking it 20 questions and then you kind of change directions a bit and it comes out with a response. And then you start a new session, and you ask that same question, and it generates a totally different response. And you're like, wait a minute, I asked it the same question. It's off the same pile of data. Why did it apparently come back with two different responses? And usually the answer is, well, the first time it had the context. You were building up a context from 20 questions and 20 answers, and just like a human, it thinks you're talking about that directionally now, and so it uses that as part of the response generation, versus if you start a new session and that's the very first question you ask, it will come back with a consistent response every time. So those are just interesting things. And then orchestration and user experience. As you put this into a real process with real users who are using this, you don't forget about their daily life, sitting down with them. How are they going to enter this, copy and paste answers? How are they getting the output into the next stage of the process they're executing? So don't ignore that part of it. And at the end of all of this too is the change management aspect. This is new for everybody. And so how to use it properly, education, the hand-holding as these things are implemented are key. So these are some things that we're seeing as kind of key to consider as you're getting into these implementations. The final section here is to go over a bit around controls. So how are we making sure we're doing this safely and securely and ensuring quality results? So Saurabh, maybe talk a little bit about what we're seeing here.
Yeah, actually, before I jump into that, one of the things that when you were talking about prompt engineering, one of the things that I realized has been a very successful method that organizations have used is what we call a prompting template, which kind of allows individuals to understand who they're prompting for, what information are they looking for, who's going to be the receiver of the information, what are some of the constraints that you want to consider in your prompt. So what that does is that creates an environment for users to be able to get trained in prompting for the right information, and that actually helps. And that's interesting because now when we get into controls, one of the things that we often get asked is, how are organizations governing the deployment of generative AI solutions at scale? And I think this is where some of these tough questions get asked around regulatory risk, data privacy risk, who's using it, the solution, how do we know that the prompts are secure, how do we know that the data is secure, how do we know that people who shouldn't have access to certain embeddings or vector databases don't have access, or how do we ensure that we are using the most effective LLM? How do we know that we are picking the right architecture? And how do we know that we are doing it at the right cost with the right level of return on investment? I think all are great questions. And which is why we've done this to ourselves. We've, highly recommend putting a governance mechanism in process when you're deploying generative AI solutions to manage the risk and the ROI, because both need to be balanced. And when these deployments are happening at scale, it's very important to understand how the risks are getting mitigated and what kind of ROI are you expecting versus what do you get. It's okay to do it in a use case environment. It's not that difficult. You have contained yourselves into maybe one or two pods that are doing it. But when you scale it out, these things become difficult to handle. And we've had a lot of client situations where clients have come back saying, "Oh, there's been an issue with us, from a security standpoint or from a data standpoint." Even quality of the data sometimes is questionable. So, which is why, going back to that earlier conversation around personas, the CDO or the data organization needs to be working hand in hand with the deployment team to ensure that the data is actually right and those patterns are right. The next slide.
Yeah.
Some of the core dimensions that and I spoke about this a little bit, in terms of what you need to do to ensure that your governance processes are right. I think obviously we spoke about, ensuring there's roles and responsibilities, there's training on usage. There are very strict usage policies, that people understand, that people have been trained on. There is a governance team that's responsible for governing all of the deployments within the organization. Now, some of this may actually sound cumbersome, and you may think that it's actually stifling innovation, but it doesn't. I think it just takes a little bit of time, like a flywheel. When you push it at the beginning, you need momentum for it to run. And what we've noticed is that initial push is a little bit hard, but then once you get it running like a machine, it actually runs really, really well. And some of the best organizations in the world are doing a great job at governing, the risk versus ROI components. Cool. Over to you, Brad.
Yeah. So a couple examples, and then we're going to do a bit of a demo here of how this stuff comes to life in actuality. But some examples of controls with compliance. So prompt input results, and the prompts inputs themselves and the results. Like, are you tracking all of that? So do you know what your organization is typing in? Do you know the results that are coming out? And how do you want to make sure you're monitoring that on a continuous basis? Citations. So I think you guys probably understand what citations are, but when I get a response back, how do I know where it came from? There were 10 documents I could have pulled from. Which document did the answer come from? Which paragraph in that document did it come from? So that, again, you have that audit trail and the assurance of that the result is actually accurate. You have content policies applied to data curation and those results. So I think data, as always, will play a key role. So is the data that you're using the approved data sets? Is it been curated, et cetera? So in which situations do you want to make sure you're forcing and locking that down? In other situations, let people be creative and interact with data. On the data side, the role-based access to solutions and features. So I don't think this is going to be a world where everybody has access to every feature and function in this landscape, and it's just a playground. You're going to give people, some people more capabilities and ability to experiment, and others are going to be part of a finished process that they're executing that was built by an organization. You have the data for RAG itself. I talked about, like, how are you indexing that, controlling that itself, and then really I think another thing that's going to come into the picture is the data versioning. So over time, as your data changes, how do you go back and say, well, now I have a new policy. I need to go re-index that and make sure that's the document that's being used. And how do I actually know and have an audit history that, policy number 1, stopped being used in this year and this date and this time, and this is when policy number 2 is indexed, and that's where answers are based. So that as, again, you're executing these processes at scale for especially regulated industries, you have that data versioning aspect of things. And then quality. So model versioning and regression testing. So we're going to live in a world, and right, the side-by-side, or Google already has it, like, I want to test these two models. And maybe I went from Palm to Gemini, and I want to see the results, or Gemini 1 to 1.5, or a Model Garden option in a Google version. So I think Google's been done a great job embracing that concept and just in letting people explore that in a great rapid way. So that's going to be something that continues. Chat, I mentioned the chat session refresh. So that can impact quality results. Again, it's a bit of a user experience or user error situation versus there's something wonky happening on the back end. So you need to be cognizant of that quality. Randomness selection or lockdown. Do you want people to dial that temperature and the randomness up or down for the quality control? And then chunking options as well. So how are you chunking this data? That's becoming more and more important as people scale and how your chunking strategies and how you look at that. So it kind of wraps up some of the discussion parts of this. Did want to go into a short demo before we open the session up to Q&A. And so what we built as we were kind of on our journey doing this at PwC was we learned that we don't want to build the same thing over and over. For each use case, we don't need a new Q&A front to back. Like, let's use the same basic Q&A feature and function, and then the data that's going in and the persona that's using it is the only thing that's changing. I don't need to build something ground up. So we said, let's try to work smarter, not harder, and put something in place that allows rapid experimentation, has this kind of persona basis, utilizes these patterns over and over so we get scale, and then has some core controls that we think people are going to need to start putting into these platforms. So that's what I'm going to show you a little bit of a demo on here. We got kind of a quick run through. So let me go ahead and you guys switch over to the demo screen now. So this is the homepage of this application. First thing to point out, at the bottom, you have the chiclets of the experiences that you can engage with. So you see Chat Explorer, Web Explorer, Business Insights, and Gemini. And so immediately we decided what you're trying to do dictates, again, a different kind of back-end and data interaction, whether you're doing interactions with unstructured data in this Chat Explorer, whether you want to index intranet or websites and that content, whether you're looking at structured data for Business Insights, so big query tables, CSV, Excel files, or whether you want Gemini to do like image, videos, audio. So we kind of immediate point here for people to interact with the use case based, this application based on the use case that they're looking at. And then another thing that we knew was important is as people come into this application that there's role-based security. We know kind of what persona that you are, what you should have access to and what you shouldn't have access to. And so as you look at some things that exist are, right, there's user administration, which is just normal role-based access privileges that you're all used to in applications we all interact with. And then as well as like personas. So if I want to look at various personas for HR and develop those, and this is where, again, you put the context in. What is this agent trying to do? I want to script that, I want to control that, or do I want to let a user define that? So that, some of the things that we do just in the beginning, as well as just some things around dashboards and metrics that we look at in terms of the usage of the application. How are people using it? What's the interaction? Are they liking the results? So some kind of core things that we built in from an overall perspective. And then also what we started to find was that we should give people more flexibility to manipulate, as opposed to having to go into the code all of the time and choose your chunk size or the region you want to run this or the temperature. Start to have settings here that somebody could dictate. Where do I want to run this? Which region, Google region, do I want to run it in? What's the temperature? Output token limits, and those obviously keep going up and up. Safety threshold. So I want, if it doesn't know the answer, do I want to block it? Some, few, most. The model type. So I want Chat Bison, Text Bison, Gemini. So let people start choosing the model type. I want to choose the model type, do some interactions, come choose a different model type, do some different interactions. This gets into the side-by-side. And then again, this gets into like chunking sizes, overlap. So let people quickly come in, configure something, iterate, without having to necessarily be programmers all of the time. Let business people more and more try to again, rapidly experiment with this technology. Going back to then, really, as you look at them jumping into the Chat Explorer function here, and I'll just use this will be an example of walking through an interaction with a set of data. So here I would start a new session for the user, and this is going to maintain session IDs. So same thing, the history. So if I want to go back to a previous session, look at those results, If I want to name these sessions, so we're doing some processes for some companies, and these are called, control 1, session this date, and it's going to, control 2, so you have testers and other things happen, doing this where they really want to document this well. You can then, download results once you get them, but this is here in your AR personas where you choose the persona. And again, this would be dictated on the role you are. So I see everything as I'm admin, but when you log into this application, you would only see the personas you have access to be. And so in this case, I'm able to choose an HR policy. It pulls in the context. And you see some other things here of whether you want to allow responses from the LLM itself, show videos, images, randomness. Again, all of those things we could control based on who's logging in. I can hide all those things, say, I don't want them to have access to do that. Actually, I don't want them to even be able to upload a document. I just want them to interact. You'll see here, these are indexes. So these are pre-curated data sets that somebody's already done the grounding, ragged the process, and now this is accessible for that user. That, in this situation, a user could upload a file. So this is where you would actually go in, choose the files from My Local, from Google Drive, the document types, and this is where I can give it an index name. It goes off, does the upload, executes, and then that index is now available here in my index here. So in this situation, I'll choose an index here. And this was an HR situation. So let's say I have somebody that's looking at HR policies and just wants to know, hey, what's the gift limit for clients? And so it's going to go look at that index and say, well, in this situation, $100 per person, and there's some exceptions with the program, et cetera. A couple things here. So first is the citation I talked about. Well, where did you get this answer from? Like, oh, well, it was from this document, Gifts Entertainment Policy, June 2023. So I know where that's coming from and kind of the paragraphs that it got on that, as well as I can give it some thumbs up, thumbs down on the responses. Like, did I like this response? Did I not like this response? And we track all that on the back end, again, because if you're seeing people put a lot of thumbs down, that could be an opportunity for training, like they're writing bad prompts. It could mean the data needs to be improved, or other things, right? The context situation we talked about, the process they're going through to do that might need to be improved. So those are things that we look at there. And again, they could download all of these results here. And those similar things are available as you look across this for these areas. So if you were to go into the business insight space, you'll see that as opposed to necessarily documents, you have things like files and tables that are accessible here. So if I were to click on this, I could see that maybe there's some BigQuery data sets and other things that will load in here in Freeform. And again, all of the same personas that exist. And in those situations, you're going to, you'll see here like show charts. I'm not going to do them with this, but this is where you would do, I want to see sales by quarter for the past year. And again, this is going to call the structured data backend for that. So we just wanted to spend a few minutes showing you guys some of like how do these controls start to come to life? How do you start to configure these systematically so that again, everybody's not building this from ground up every single time, and that the organization can kind of have some guardrails for what you're letting people do or not do. So anyway, I think that's really what we had in terms of the demo. Let me switch back over to the final couple slides, I think. All right, so to wrap up session, a couple more ways to engage with PwC folks. If anybody's interested, here's a QR code. You can get information on any of those events for tomorrow, breakfast and a couple sessions and a happy hour tomorrow for those who are interested. As well as, I know Google has some other things that you can get engaged with, and you can scan that QR code for that information.